Well, hey everybody, this is Mr. Perry, and today we're going to go over selection. Going to take things a little bit further than what we have before. We're going to cover this, kind of the background for this will it crash activity, which is really going to require you to think about what we've learned about robots and robotic movement and programming algorithms for robots. And we're going to apply basic if statements. Then we're going to look at what are called sequential if statements, so one after another after another. And then we're going to get into nested if statements. And on top of that, we're also going to talk about the if-else statement, which applies a different set of rules to the whole situation. So let's get started. We're going to go back to the pseudocode packet, and there's a whole section on the pseudocode packet dedicated to selection. And it starts with your basic if statement. So it says, if this condition is met, then do this. Now it's easy for us to follow when we're looking at the blocks, right? If this condition is met, then we're going to do what's inside here. But now that we're looking at some text-based languages, we've got to learn about these little things right here and right here. These are called curly braces, and they're super common in text-based languages. And the right one comes first, and then the left-facing curly brace comes first, and then the right-facing curly brace comes second, right? And on your keyboard, if you hit the Shift key and then look at the bracket keys that are next to the letter P, that's where you'll find the curly braces. You've got the left-facing one and then the right-facing one. So these braces, basically in a text-based language, they operate the exact same way as the boxes do on the block-based pseudocode. So it's essentially the same concept, right? It says if this condition is met, if this condition is true, then do everything that is contained within this left and right-facing curly brace. And if this condition is not true, then we ignore everything that is contained within these two. All right, so these curly braces, again, you're going to start to see them a little bit more, and it's just something to get used to. Imagine them basically as boxes, surrounding a block of statements. All right, so that is your general introduction to the if statement. Now let's look at some robot and will it crash type activities. So we'll kind of work through this one together, sort of line by line. This one has a couple of commands that are going to happen no matter what. You're going to rotate left, and you are definitely going to rotate left here. But this move forward and then this move forward, these are only going to execute if this command is actually evaluates to true. So if we take this kind of line by line, here's how you would work through this one. First thing that happens is, again, from our starting position is right here, we're facing in that direction. First thing that happens is line 1 tells us to go ahead and rotate left. So we rotate left, and we are now facing upward. Next thing that's going to happen is it's going to check line 2. It's going to say if can move forward. So what that's asking is the space in front of it empty, which again is true. Because that's true, we go ahead and execute line 3, 4, and 5. Actually, the only line that executes is line 4, because line 3 and line 5 are the left and right curly brace, again, operating as that boundary for this whole thing. So now we've shoved forward once, and then the next line will execute, which is line 6. This one tells us to rotate left. We have to do this one. And now, before we do anything else, it's going to say, all right, if the robot can move forward, and in this case, it can't, this line's going to evaluate to false. So because of that, all of this stuff down here is essentially just skipped. It does not execute because line 7 evaluates to false. All right, so that's essentially how you would work that basic problem out. This would be your end position, and this robot did not crash. Okay, so there you go. There is your end state. Yay, we did it. Let's see what happens next. So here's some other examples of this. Okay, very similar to what you're going to have to do in class for this activity. So for this one, again, you've got the move forward command where we have to do that. Here's your if command, so we may or may not do that. Here's your curly braces, your left and right facing curly brace. So this will only execute if this evaluates to true, but then we are going to rotate left and then move forward. So these three lines, this one, and this one happen no matter what. So we'll look at this first scenario. We're facing this direction. Tells you move forward, boom, so we move forward. And then it says if you can move forward, which again, the space is open, so it's going to happen. It evaluates to true. Because it evaluates to true, we now move forward twice. So we go boom and boom. Now we're going to rotate left and move forward one more time. We did not crash. This would be our end position right here. All right, now that changes with this one. If we take this black square and just shoved it over one, we would end up crashing. And the reason is the starting position is right here, and we move forward. And because this next space is actually empty, we can move forward, but then we have to move forward twice because that's what's inside those boundaries. So you move once and then boom, that's when you crash. So that's where that one would stop. And if we shove that forward just one more to the center and run this scenario once more, we move forward. So that takes us to here. And then it says if you can move forward, which you can't because of that black box being right there. So you skip everything that's contained in those braces and then rotate left and move forward. That's going to end you right here. We did not crash. So hopefully this is making sense. If not, just back up, rewatch this section, and just make sure you understand how this part works before you move on, because this is only going to continue to get more challenging and more complicated. Okay, so now we're going to look at what are called sequential if statements. All right, when we have, instead of nesting them, we'll look at nested if statements in a second. But what happens if we just have if can move forward, if can move forward, rotate left, and then if can move forward? Basically, if we want to be really, really careful and make sure that our robot doesn't crash, then it would make sense to put all of our move forward commands in an if statement and only make it move forward if it actually can move forward. So in this algorithm, you've got an if statement, and then there's your braces. Here's the next if statement, and then here's the braces. Here's your rotate left command, so we're going to do this no matter what. And then finally, here's your other if command, and then here are your braces here and here. So just working through it again, we start right here. If it can move forward, which it can, boom, we move forward. And then it's going to do the next check. If you can move forward again, which you can, it moves forward. So we execute that. Now we're going to rotate left, and now we're facing upward. And that last if can move forward would execute. And so once this disappears, there it goes. Again, you would move forward again, and there's where you end. Okay. For this one right here, your starting point is here. You're facing this way. It says if you can move forward, then move forward, which you do. But now we can't move forward, so that second one would not execute. This one would evaluate to false. So you would skip this part, and you would jump down to the rotate left. So now we're facing upward, but then that final third if command would execute to would evaluate to false. So we would not move forward. All right, so that would be your ending position here. And then finally, if we were to remove that barrier, then we would move forward on the first command. We would not move forward on the second command. We would rotate left, and then on the third if statement, since we can move forward, we would push forward one more time. All right, so again, hopefully this is making sense. If it's not, just stop the video, back it up just a little bit more, look this over a bit more, and make sure that this is making sense before you move on. So now we're going to talk about if-else statements. If-else statements basically say either do this or do that. All right, so we've got to do one or the other. And if we do one, if our condition evaluates to true and we execute this block of statements, then we would skip everything that's in the else. All right, this would we basically just pretend it doesn't occur. In fact, I often like to look at, okay, if the if part evaluates to true, I'll often take my pen or pencil and just physically scratch this part out just so I don't screw it up and accidentally do that part. And you'll see the benefit of this, I think, a little bit down the road. So again, and the if part, if that evaluates to true, you're going to do that. But if it evaluates to false, you have to do what's in the else command. All right. So again, you've got your curly braces, which act as the boundaries for the if part, and then under the else part, you'll have another pair of curly braces, which again act as the bounds for all of that. Okay. So let's take this a step further and look at how it applies to our robot situation. So here's another example problem. You can see we're going to rotate left, and then we have an if and an else. So we're going to do, once we rotate left, we're either going to do this part or we're going to do this part, and then we're going to move forward one more time. Notice that this move forward is outside of the else brace, so that means this is a part of our sequence. We have to do this. All right, so you always want to look at the way bottom and make sure if there's any other commands down here that are outside of these braces. Remember that those are going to execute no matter what. So here we go. Starting in this position, first thing we're going to do is rotate left. Well, now we're facing upward and we're facing a black square, so we cannot move forward, right? So if can move forward would evaluate to false. We would skip this part, which means we're going to rotate left and then rotate left again and then move forward. This would be our ending position. Okay, so we did this one, check. We skipped that one because it was false, which means we had to do this part and then we had to do this part. Here's our second one. We're going to end up crashing on this guy. First thing we have to do is rotate left, so we go from facing that way to this way. And then it says if you can move forward, then move forward. And now we're going to skip everything that's under the else command, and then we have to move forward one more time. So boom, that's where we end up crashing. And then finally this guy over here, we start in that left facing position. It's essentially a repeat of this one right here. We rotate left, so we're facing upward. And now we cannot move forward, so this evaluates to false. We skip this command, which means we have to do the two rotate lefts and then move forward. So we rotate left, left, move forward, and that's our end position. Okay, just like before, make sure this part makes sense. Review this portion of the video if you feel it's necessary, because now we're going to get to the most complex of them all. We're going to look at nested statements, nested if-else statements. So here we have an if command, or an if statement. If can move forward, then do this. So if this evaluates to true, we're going to do this, which means we would skip everything under the else braces, right? And then we would jump down here to this move forward. Notice that this this else statement, you've got your left facing brace right here, and then the corresponding right facing brace for it is down here. Notice that they line up vertically. If the part of this evaluates to false, then you have to do what's in this else. And so now that we're down here, you can see we have another if, which is nested inside that else. So again, if this part evaluates to false, we have to do what's in here, which again is going to start within an if statement. If this evaluates to true, we have another set of curly braces here and here, and again we would have to do all of this. If not, we would just do that part down here, and then we would do that part down here. So again, this gets a little bit tricky. All right, it tells you right up here. All of the previous rules we've gotten into apply, but tracing the code here can be a little bit tricky, so you've just got to be super methodical and really, really careful. So we'll go through some of these. Starting here, facing that way, if can move forward, you totally can move forward. So you would do that. This would evaluate to true, which means we skip everything from that green brace down to that green brace, and then we would just move forward one more time. So that's actually pretty easy, right? You just end up right here. All right, let's look at this one here. If our starting position is here, okay, if can move forward would evaluate to false because you can't move forward. So then it's going to say, all right, all of this stuff under else is going to execute. All right, if can move backward, well, the space behind it is available, so this would evaluate to true. We rotate left, move forward. So we go this way, that way, and then move forward. Okay, now this still applies. We have to move forward here, and then we have to move forward here. So we would go boom, boom, and then there you go. Finally, we have a situation where we end up crashing because, you know, essentially if we just add a, if we just added a black square right here, then you would end up crashing in that last part. You would start here, the if can move forward would evaluate to false, so we'd go down to that else part. If can move backward would evaluate to true, so you would rotate that way, move backward. But then again, we have this move forward still in that else, which pushes us here. And then outside of the else, we have this final move forward, which pushes us into here, and then that makes us crash. So now we've gotten through all of that background. Let's look at, I'm only going to look at the first column or the first problem for each of these will it crash activities. I'm going to leave it to you to try the second and the third, and then compare your answers with a partner and make sure you guys agree. Make sure you're understanding how it all works. So let's look at what we have. We have an if, all right, if can move left, then do that. And then we have an if else, and then we have something that we have to do, which is move forward. So we're going to check if we can do this first, and if it's not, then we don't do it. Then we're going to check if we can do this, and if we can, we'll do it. If not, we have to do this part, because remember, with an if else, you have to do either this or that, all right? And then finally, we have to do that move forward. So here we are, facing this direction. If can move left. All right, well, facing this direction, left is up here, and it totally can move left. So you would rotate, and now we're facing upward, okay? Now we get into here, it says if can move right. Well, if we're facing upward, then the square to our right is gray, which means we cannot move right. So then we skip this part, and we jump down to the else. So now we have to rotate left, and now we have to move forward. So on this particular example, we end up totally crashing, all right? So there's the first one. Again, you've got two other versions of this one to think through and work through. After that, we start to get our text-based versions. And again, here's where things get a little bit trickier. I do like to highlight a little bit, so that way I can, again, just kind of keep a better track of what commands go with what curly braces, right? So we have an if can move forward, and then an if can move left, if can move right, rotate right. So we have two if statements nested inside this if statement here, all right? So if this evaluates to true, we do this, and then we would check this if statement, and if this evaluates to true, we would do it. If not, none of this would execute, and we would jump down here, okay? If this evaluates to true, and we do this, and then if that evaluates to true, then we would do this, and then if this evaluates to true, we would do this, but then we would still have to do that command down here. So again, you only do what's inside those bounds if these conditions evaluate to true. So let's look at what we've got. We've got this robot facing this gray box. So if can move forward would totally evaluate to false. So none of this would execute, all right? It wouldn't do this check or this check because it never entered this curly brace, right? If can move forward evaluates to false, which means none of this would execute. So we basically just end up crashing on that one, all right? Because none of this executes, you just boom, go straight to move forward, okay? But if that were to evaluate to true, you would have moved forward, and then you would have done the next check, And if that would have evaluated to true, then you would rotate left, and then you would do the next check. And again, if it can do this, it would do that, and then it would still need to do that command before it's done. So again, try out those other two. Finally, we get to this bad boy. Okay, so here's the way you work through something like this. First off, you just got to kind of work your way through it. And again, I like using this highlighter system to sort of look at, all right, here's a big if else command, right? Or a big if else statement. So if you can move forward, and then start doing all of these, okay? But if you can't move forward, you skip all of this stuff, and then you have to do what's in this else command. You would rotate left, and then finally, I believe there's a move forward. Yeah, move forward at the bottom. Okay, well, here we are on our first one. We totally can move forward, so because that evaluates to true, you would move the bot forward, and boom, here you are facing in that direction. So now we have our next if else command, right? So if this evaluates to true, we're going to do all of this, but if evaluates, and then we would ignore that else part. But if this evaluated to false, then we would ignore all of this, and we would have to do what's in this else command. So because we're right here now, all right, and we are facing in that direction, we can actually move left, okay? Which means we would go on to this next line, which is another check to see if you can move right. Now at this point, what I like to start doing is I like to kind of annotate a little bit, right? With this particular problem, you know, we could move forward, and because this if evaluated to true, I would just take my pen or my pencil and I would scratch out that corresponding else, all right? Because what you don't want to do is you don't want to work your way through this logic and then end up doing some of these other commands that technically you skip because you're in an else. So I would actually recommend, as soon as you know that this if statement is true, if there's a corresponding else, you can just scratch off everything that's in between those left and right facing curly braces. All right, so we did say yes to that and we moved forward, and then I could move left. I said yes to that. So that means, again, I would get rid of everything that's in. I would just scratch that out so I don't screw it up and, you know, accidentally do that. All right, so where are we at? We moved forward and we said, yes, we can move left. So then the next line is, well, can you move right? Which would evaluate to true. And because this is an if else, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that part. Now this algorithm is a lot easier. It's a lot less daunting to or intimidating to work through. You can see pretty clearly that from starting position, you are going to move forward, rotate right, move forward, and then move forward again, right? You can see where all of those commands are when you take the time to kind of block all that other stuff out. So working through this one again, we moved forward, we said you can move left, but we also can move right. So now we're going to rotate right and we're going to move forward, and guess what? We're going to have to move forward one more time because of that bottom one, which means we totally end up crashing on that particular activity. All right, so this bottom row, this third column, is definitely the most complex. Like I say, go through it methodically, go through it very carefully, make sure you understand the logic, and I highly recommend just taking a pencil, and as soon as you know an if-else statement, as soon as you know that an if evaluates to true, just take your pencil and scratch out the else part that goes along with it. You know, and again, that notice that these curly braces line up with, you know, this is the if, and then this is the else that goes along with it, and then you can see they indent again. If, you know, here corresponds with that else. Some programmers maintain that curly braces should not be on lines by themselves, that actually that curly brace should be here, and that curly brace should be there, and it makes the code a little bit more easier to read and follow. But this is how the code is going to be presented to us potentially on the AP exam. So it's important that we have the tools necessary to deal with it. And as you're working through this particular activity, if you want to get some highlighters and even highlight, you know, okay, in one color, I know that this goes along with, you know, kind of like how I did here. It just helps kind of put a little bit of a structure to something that can appear slightly unstructured. All of these random curly braces, again, just get a little confusing in terms of what means what. Well, hopefully, now that you've had a chance to see how all of this works, it'll make a little bit more sense, and you should have all of the knowledge necessary to handle the will it crash activity. So thanks for watching, and I will see you in class.